I'm a member of the Melco applications team. Today we will be looking at multiple hoopings for designs that are too large for your hoop. So I've done this for large banners like in parades. I've done it for tablecloths where the front of it goes over the front of the table so that the name of the company is visible to anybody coming up to the table. There you go. So on the table, we've got some examples of things that we can do with these. There we go. And in coming up with this, I've done this, again, for lots of different things. Table runners, you could do it along the edge of a pillowcase, lots and lots of different things. Here we've got just a table runner, and this is 3 placements, and I used 36 by 30 for this, and obviously this is way too big for this, so this was done in 3 different hoopings, and actually I broke a few of my rules on this one. I did the sides first, and then I sewed the middle. And the reason I did that is if anything didn't line up exactly, I'd cover it up with this applique, and that's going to help me out quite a bit. This piece is just a large ribbon. I thought it was a 6-inch ribbon. It's actually 5.5. And I put this in the middle so you could throw this on a mantelpiece or across something, and you can do this with any holiday, really, or anything that you would want to do. And then to try to get this into a smaller context that we could do in a live video, I just did a smaller embroidered Christmas ribbon, and I feel really bad, you guys, for doing this to you with all of these holiday things. I feel like I'm a exercise in things too soon, much like flavored coffees rhyming with schmumpkin schmice. But it applied really well to what we're doing here. So let's look at how to actually divide up some of these designs. In Design Shop, I brought up the Thanksgiving one that we just did on that banner. And I have it as the whole design, and it is almost 30 inches long, which is just kind of ridiculous for embroidery sometimes, but sometimes I do ridiculous things. And the way that I divide these things up typically is I decide what hoop's going to work for me. Find out which hoop's going to work best for you or what you have available to you. And then in another project, I just showed that hoop on screen, and then I digitized around, let me hide my stitching, I digitized around that hoop limit so that I know exactly what I can fit in that hoop. And I copy that, and then I paste it into my design. And you can use a vector line. You can use, I'm using a walk normal here because anybody who can digitize can use a walk normal. You don't have to have vector to do that. And this is how I decide how to divide things up. What can I fit? Well, I can slide this over. I can definitely fit the leaves and happy. And I tend to go to the ends first just to see what I can fit. That's not typically how I would sew it. Here I can do the S and giving and the leaves, or to give myself a little bit more room, I may just do giving and the leaves. And here I'm going to do thanks. And to help myself line up, I'm going to do thanks first, and I'm going to use laser alignment to make sure that that's straight. And I'm using laser alignment on the machine without the vector line. Without the vector line, I'm not going to accidentally scale something. And since I'm not lining up to anything printed, I don't have to worry about lining up to odd specific marks in the artwork. So I'm going to zoom in really close here. And in yet another color, just so that I can keep track of things. So let's do this bright pink. I will digitize registration marks. So what I'm doing is I'm doing a little walk kind of a plus, but I'm going to angle it so that it's easier to hide underneath the element that I'm going to sew later. So if I show this in 3D, you can see it on top. In reality, it would be underneath. But I'm going to sew thanks and this registration mark here, and then I'm going to do the same thing over here, and I'm lining it up on that origin line. So I'm all of my Y coordinates for this horizontal section are going to be 0. So I want to line that up exactly on there. I'm going to angle it so it's easier to cover up later, because I'm just going to sew over these registration marks. I don't want to have to deal with ripping them out later. And once I have that, I'm pretty good to go. So I'm going to delete this, and then I'll select, so you can copy out and paste how you want it, or what I tend to do is select what I don't want in my hooping. So I want the S, I want the registration mark, but I don't want the rest of this, so I'm going to delete it. And if you were smarter than I was or am, you would save as something first. That way you don't accidentally save over your original design. So here I have the first piece. It's just thanks, and then these registration marks, and then I would save that as something. And I already have it saved as Thanksgiving 1, because that's my first sew out. Then I have my second sew out, my third sew out. Now the trick with those other sew outs, so I'm going to undo a couple times, is let's say I want to do the giving and the leaves. So I will delete all of this. I'm going to leave the registration mark so I know what to line up to. Now here's kind of the weird part about laser alignment. So when you're using laser alignment, the laser will be focused whenever I press this laser, wherever this laser light comes on, and I don't really want you sticking your finger on here, but wherever that laser light comes on will essentially be the origin of the design. So if I'm looking at my design and I have it kind of offset or whatever, I'm going to be looking at where those red lines cross, and that's what I'm going to be lining up to. So when I'm dealing with those other pieces, I'm going to slide my pieces left or right, and I'm going to use Alt to do that so that I'm locked in and I'm not accidentally moving it where I don't want it to be. But I'm going to move that registration mark over that origin so that when I start the next piece, that's what I'm lining up to, and I have something very concrete in my design to do it. And that's why you can do all of this with hand drawing all of your registration marks, but I'm not that clever with a ruler, and I'm really not that clever in the morning without coffee, so I put it in the design so that I can see it on screen, I know what I'm lining up to, and then it sews out, and I have all of that done for me. So let's go back to Design Shop and look at how to do that. So I will drag this over so that that pink registration mark is right over that origin. I'm going to nudge it one over. All right. Let's grab that. We'll go one over. There. So now we've got that right where we want it. And then I'm going to delete the registration mark from the second and third hoopings because I don't want to sew that. And so I have all of these set up ahead of time. I would do the same thing with the third hooping, the thanks and the leaves. And so I would sew that thanks, get my registration marks, line everything up, and go with the rest of that. So I'm not going to save this for me. You guys already have it. I believe there's been a link that has been posted with all of the files and instructions on how to do, or how I set up the pumpkin. The same applies for any of these, and actually if you guys watched the split front with Sue, very much the same type of thing was used with that. So in the example that we're going to sew, it's just a little bitty bit of holly and ivy. We can do that on a ribbon. It can go fairly quickly. I only have one piece. If you wanted to, you could do multiple versions of this so the repeat was less noticeable. And notice where I have my origin. So I've moved everything off, and this is where it's very different from kind of everything we've ever told you about. Center the design before you sew it. When I'm doing stuff like this, that's definitely not something I do. And then if you look over here in the green, I have a registration mark on the end to know where to start my next piece. And so I'm just going to keep repeating this pattern. And if I want to test this out, which typically I do, I'll often duplicate it and slide that piece over to make sure that when I line this up, it really does look like I think it's going to look, just to see, is this what I think it is? And in this case, yeah, it is. And it's definitely easier to split up these designs if you know ahead of time that you're going to be doing laser alignment. So let's look at how to actually prepare, in this case, the ribbon on the table. And we'll look at how this all started out. So here I've got just my paper sketch of what I started with. Here we've got what it actually looks like, but how to actually set this up. Tools that I need for that. I definitely need tape. I don't know how to embroider without some sort of masking tape. It's just not a thing I can do. In this case, I will occasionally use some spray adhesive, embroidery adhesive. Not something I love to do with mucking up my needles, but when I'm dealing with registration like this, I don't want my stuff to move. So I'm going to be embroidering on this piece here. Other things that you will need, definitely a ruler. I have this 4-foot monster of a ruler. I used this for the pumpkin table runner. And by the way, all of these files in that download that you guys have are available in OFM. So if your initial isn't an M, you can just swap that out with whatever initial you want, then you can create your own. All right, so let me get this out of the way. And then we'll definitely want something to stabilize. So in this case, I'm using Tearaway, which isn't terribly stable, but I am doubling it up just a touch. And then I'm gonna lay this here. I may or may not use some spray adhesive to attach that. And then the other trick is, again, the masking tape. I'm going to tape down the edges of this. So if I'm doing continuous stuff, I'm hooping up my backing so that my backing is big enough to fit in my hoop. But I'm going to just attach my material with that. If my material is bigger than my hoop, this becomes less of an issue. And to keep things from moving, I will use tape. Now, the tricky part with the tape, at least for me, is I tend to be a little too aggressive with how much I have on it. So here I have kind of this huge amount. When I get to the part that comes down, I may, when it's in the hoop, rip out the section so I don't sew over the tape, which I may or may have not done at timer 12. And then I'm going to tape down this other side. Other things you may want to consider when you're doing this. You might want to consider an iron, because having flat goods is a lot easier than trying to deal with wrinkled stuff. And because I'm dealing with wireframe or wire edge ribbon, it gets a little bit goofy when it's been crinkled up a little. All right, so these are my edges. These are holding my edges. I will definitely have to rip a piece out so that I don't sew a nice big holly leaf right onto my thread. And then I need the piece that I'm going to line up to. So I'm going to try to hit the center with another piece of tape. Again, I can't typically embroider without tape. And then I'm using a quilter's ruler for this. This is dead useful for me. If you don't have it, you can use a normal ruler. That's totally fine. This just makes my life a little easier. And I'm sorry, I'm going to get into the shot to make sure I'm actually over it. So I go halfway, and then I draw a line. I'm using, scary enough, a tiny permanent marker. You can absolutely, if you don't want to do this tape and you have disappearing marking ink for fabric, that's completely fine. I made the mistake of, don't be like me, I made the mistake of doing a whole project. It was a big tablecloth. It had this snowflake pattern, and it was 6 locations and 6 spirally pieces, and by the time I got to the 5th, my disappearing tailored chalk had disappeared, and when I measured it again to redo it, I was off by 1/2 inch, so don't be like me. All right, now, let's put this in. I'm gonna put in one end, hold it tight, snap to the other end. I am a little bit crooked. I really, really don't care. We're gonna be using laser alignment. So let's go to load this on the machine. And let's actually look in the software to make sure I have the design loaded that I think I do, and I do. So now I am looking at where this laser light is, and I want it to fall right on that little black line, and I'm gonna go all the way over to the edge. And I'm going to tell it, okay, start here. So that's laser left, and then I'm gonna go all the way to the other edge, and there are tons of different commands for this. Do you want it to be centered? Do you want it to line up on the left? Do you want it to line up on the right? And do I remember all of those? No, I have to look them up pretty much every time, and that's okay. They're in the manual, and there's pictures for each one that you want to do. Now, because I'm lining up on the left side this time, I did laser left, laser right, laser center, and I overshot myself a little bit. So I'm out of the hoop limit, so I'm just going to move over, and as long as I'm along that line, I'm going to be just fine. And then I'm going to trace it, and yeah, I totally went over that tape, so I'm going to just remove just a chunk of that tape, just where it's going to sew. I still want it to sew, or to hold everywhere else. There we go. Looks a little funny. And then the other part is remove the part of the center line that's in your hoop. I don't want to be sewing over that either. All right, so I'm going to press go. It's going to start sewing. And you have this design too. I thought I was being super clever with the colors when I chose them. After sewing it out, I decided to change it a little bit, so it's sewing in different colors here. You guys can sew in whatever colors you want. If you want it brighter, do it brighter. If you want it less so, do whatever you want. Completely up to you. So there are just about 7,000 stitches in this design. It's sewing out. The other thing to think about when you're doing stuff like this is, try to get out of the way so you can see everything, is rectilinear shapes, right angles, things like that. Trying to line that up can be very, very difficult. So if you use curvilinear shapes, curves, S shapes, organic shapes, it's a lot easier to hide if things don't line up just perfectly. You'll also see me a lot of times when I'm doing this, just overlap the last few stitches with a different type of stitch or just another piece, just to make sure that that seam is far less noticeable. Sorry, I need to make sure that I still have a voice. So here we've got just the top piece that's sewing, then it will curve back down. So you can see that it goes up and down and up and down and up and down. And as it's doing that, that too makes it harder to tell, is it crooked on the ribbon? If it is, who can know? And then the other thing that this allows you to do, especially if you're doing a shape like this, is if you wanted this to border something round, like a Christmas tree skirt or something like that, or I guess the brim of a cap, hat, not a cap. If you were doing something that was round, just slight changes in that angle, the shorter your segment, the more easily it's going to go around that form. Very similar to if you were setting up a decorative walk, or even just walk stitches. The longer the stitch, the less it follows that shape. So the shorter your element, the more easily it can follow a form if you're trying to follow a squirrelier path than just a straight line right down your angle, or right down your ribbon angle. So again, I've done this for big tablecloths. I've done it for beauty pageant sashes, multiple hoopings like this. You can do it all in one line. I've done it multiple lines. That's a little bit tougher because you've got to get lines parallel and all of your placements in multiple spots. that is a little bit tougher. The way that I found was easiest for me was to actually just digitize all of my registration marks so that they fit in one hoop, and then I hooped up the fabric, got it lined up, did just those registration marks for one, and then I went in and rehooped for each of those different locations. The other thing, when I'm doing things this large, I ran out of bobbin. When I'm doing things this large, I typically will do applique because I don't really want to spend all the time with all of those stitches. So applique is a good feature to pair with this. Just to keep that in mind. And yeah, we're good in sewing again. Talked about applique, talked about multiple locations, talked about typically starting with knowing that you're going to do it. I start with drawings. So if you wanted to see, it can be just a pencil drawing just on a piece of scrap. If you don't have those chops, that's fine. You can start with just keyboard lettering and cut that up as you need to. So you, just like with Thanksgiving, you can put out all of your keyboard lettering and then just convert to wireframe and select the pieces that you want to use. Just don't forget to add those registration marks. That makes a huge, huge difference. Trying to think of other thoughts while this sews out so that we can see the final product. Oh, I had mentioned that I'm not using a vector line to do this laser alignment. You absolutely can. The only times I would strongly consider not using it is if I'm lining up to something very specific and trying to make that width very much match whatever my garment is. So if I was doing something like a pillowcase where I knew that it had to be exactly, I don't know, 14, 16, 18 inches wide, I would not use the vector line in Design Shop to assist with the laser alignment. I would do everything based on the origin to prevent any of that scaling. And then the other thing to prevent kind of movement and anything shrinking with that push and pull and distortion, because when you're doing all of this alignment and multiple pieces and all of that, you definitely want to consider how things move when they're done, so you want to stabilize that as well as you can. So either use a very stable material, or you'll want to use some stabilizer underneath to make sure that that doesn't move.
Question, which size Mighty Hoops are you using?
Oh, that's a good question, and I never remember. So the question was, what size Mighty Hoop am I using? So I apologize, I'm going to have to look. This is the 13 by 8, I think. Yeah, that I used for the Happy Thanksgiving. That's also the one that I used for, I did a friend's chasuble, and I did 12 different hoopings on that when he became a priest, and I loved this hoop for that. And then for the pumpkin, I used the 36 by 30 just standard hoop. And then for the one that's sewing right now, it's the 8 and change, like 8 1/4 by 6 1/4. And I just did that because it was a nice, handy one for this. Do you need Mighty Hoops for this? No. Do they make life a little bit easier when I'm dealing with wireframe ribbon? Sure. But I can totally do this with normal hoops all day long. It's completely up to you. In fact, if you're dealing with stuff that is just really long, sometimes those longer hoops can be helpful for that. Other thoughts, other questions? As we scroll frantically through the chat. Cool. Looks like no so far, which is great. I've got a couple of different tapes that I've been using. So I've got, mostly it's painter's tape, the masking tape that is cooler because it masks out paint better and it's easy to remove. The green stuff I absolutely love for things that I need to see and have great visibility for. It is a little more expensive. However, if you're going to be doing something where you're using a water-soluble topping, and you are going to be getting that wet before removing this. Just be careful. This has an additive that reacts with water and kind of seals that a little more quickly. If I don't want that on my garment, this is not the tape that I want to use. Other than that, I'm a big fan of it. I'm a big fan of the blue stuff. I have multiple different widths. The thinner stuff I typically use for marking my place. The wider stuff I usually use for just sticking stuff down and making sure it doesn't move. And then we've got about a half a minute left on this, and then I will rehoop it and show you how to line up the next piece. You also are noticing that I'm using the simplified interface. Ooh, that was close to the tape. Okay, so I didn't tear off enough tape. I'm using the simplified. You can do it in simplified or advanced, either one. It's completely up to you. So now we just have the holly berries left. And then we'll take a look at that, and you can see just how silly I was. All right. All right, so this is done. You can see that I got really, really, really close right over here. Not my best removing of this tape. I thought I was far enough. I wasn't far enough over. So let's look back at this table and figure out how to rehoop this. All right, so I have this piece. I'm just going to pull this off. I typically don't remove this tape until I'm done with this section, and you can just keep going. Like once you're done with this, take the backing off, tape up the next bit, and go. I'm going to move this in. The other thing that I typically do to myself, so be better than I am about this, is I will go right up to the edge, and I will hoop this, and I will be exceeding my hoop limit, so I need to bring my registration mark a little bit farther in. All right, so all I did was hoop this up again, and now I'm going to use laser alignment. I'm going to go off of this little tiny digitized registration mark to the other side of this line as far as I can. The longer the line, the better my alignment. So I'm going to go, again, straight over to this little digitized registration mark. I did it very much to hide in the pine needles that sews over it. So you don't have to worry about ripping that out. You'll just sew over it and you'll never see it. Also, when you're doing this, you're moving the hoop around on the machine, and your design will occasionally end up outside the hoop limit, and the screen will show up all red and be scary. Don't stress about it. When you center it, it will be all lined up. So now I just need to remove this tape, and we could start sewing again, and it would line up. So I'm going to sew just a few stitches, and then I will trim it and show it to you to show that it is lining up. But I'm not going to sew this whole thing again, because that would just take forever. All right, so I'm just going to stop it, trim it, pull this off, and if we look, you can now see that this little piece has sewn right over that registration mark and completely hidden it. So you'll hear me say a lot of times, you know, embroidery is not about being perfect, it's about hiding the fact that you're not. This is one of the key areas that I do that. I put stuff on a curve, or I overlap things, or I do all these little embroidery tricks just to hide slight imperfections that may occur. But I think multiple hoopings and continuous embroidery can be a lot of fun, and it can actually get you, instead of thinking outside the box, you're thinking outside the hoop, and you can go far beyond what you typically would sew. You've got all of these examples available to you in OFM. You've got the whole of both of those files, so you can see it ahead of time, and then you've got all the pieces as I divided them up. You've got an article, so you can read how, at least my thought process on this. And then this is just the easiest one to start with, just little sections. Go from one to the next, and have fun with it. Please, please try this. I think you'll really like it. And we will see you next time on the next live session. Thank you so much.